All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is Michael Dean. You're watching the Prince podcast. And before we continue, please subscribe. Hit the subscribe button down below and check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/podcastjuice. All right, with that, let's work it like a job. Peace. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Prince podcast here on podcastjuice.net. My name is Michael Dean, and joining me today is Mr. Big Sexy and Saxer. How are you?
I am well in the afterglow of the Thanksgiving holiday.
Oh, yes, that's right. So we're definitely coming off of a longer weekend. Now, joining us today, I love saying that, we have a great guest that is so much history and so much excellent work. Like, I was sort of blown away by the quality of what we're going to talk about and the quantity. But joining us today is, and I love to say this as well, Grammy winning producer, composer, arranger, Mr. Brent Fischer. Sir, how are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you. How are you?
Man, I'm blessed. Cannot complain. I am excited to talk with you today. Listen, let me just get the I always do this, but let me get the fanboy excitement out of the way first of all, and let me get some of the ignorance out. That I may be speaking for some other Prince fans. 4 years, I always thought that your father,
don't say it,
Clare. Now you got to keep it 100. We got to keep it real. Always thought your father, Clare Fischer. Now again, let me set this up. All I had at the time was the Parade album and things of that nature, you know, when I was younger, and I would be like, "Oh, wow, Clare Fischer, this lady is incredible."
And he said it.
But I was wrong. Clare Fischer is a man. He's a great man. But I say that because I know a lot of us Prince fans stopped that, and some of y'all can stop lying because you know you did. But
yeah.
But no, Clare Fischer is an incredible composer, musician, probably more things than I can even name. So I want to give up thanks and appreciation to your father and to you, Brent, for carrying on the legacy. And as we like to say, you know, lifting our parents up. That's an incredible thing that you're doing there. And that's a service. So let me just get all the platitudes and all that gratitude stuff. You're doing an exceptional job. But yes, your father was amazing. You are amazing. So this is why we're here today. But welcome to the show, man. I kind of got caught up there.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. This was an amazing experience I had with my father. I mean, it's not just incredible that we worked for so many years for Prince, but the fact that my father and I worked together for 32 years.
Wow.
And a lot of that time spent working on Prince projects. And we started when I was really young. He was already a fully established, you know, composer, arranger, producer with a long history of, you know, great artists that he had worked for, you know, the Jackson 5, Robert Palmer, Santana, so many great artists that he had written for over the years. And so when he started working for Prince, he brought me on board. I was just, you know, barely out of high school at that point. So he gave me things to do that were appropriate for my capabilities at the time. And as these capabilities grew, as I grew older, then he gave me more and more things to do. And next thing I knew, after a long time of doing a bunch of different assisting type roles with him, I was transcribing all the charts. So that means everything Prince would send us, it would be a recording. First a cassette, later on a CD, and then finally MP3 files. And so we needed that written out, because in order to write an orchestral score and record all those orchestral musicians and have everything come out well in the studio, we need to have everything written out. So I had to have, first was to write out Prince's chart, what he played, what his band played, everything. And I gave, you know, an incredible amount of detail, because that became the basis for the orchestration. That was everything that we would look at to make the orchestration. So I wrote down everything that was on everything that I heard on that recording, including all the background vocal lines, guitar solos, drum fills, keyboard riffs, sound effects. I put it all in, everything basically except for what color socks that the background vocalist was wearing, and I guess that might have been Prince even doing his own background vocals most of the time there. But so then we got into doing that. Then I started. I would play in the orchestra when he needed it. My training is as a symphony percussionist, so I would do the percussion parts when he needed it occasionally. Then I started managing the orchestras. I would be responsible for hiring the orchestra, doing all the paperwork, making sure everything got done, interfacing with Prince's assistants and the record company, and planning all the schedules. And then later on, I became a ghostwriter. Before that, we always discussed things as he was doing the writing when I was younger, and I would throw ideas at him, and every once in a while he would use one of them, but nothing that big, because like I said, I was pretty young at the time. As I got older, as we got moving along in our careers, then he liked some of the ideas that I gave him so much that he would start incorporating them into his arrangement, and at sometimes it would be a co-writing situation where we had a heavy deadline, we had a lot of stuff to do, and basically he would write all day and just lay down the pencil when he was tired and couldn't stay awake anymore at night, and then he'd go to sleep. Then I'd come over to his house at night, and I would write all night. And then when I couldn't stay awake anymore in the early morning, I would put down the pencil right in the middle of a phrase. Didn't matter, we could finish each other's ideas at that point, because we had been working together for about 20 years and working for Prince for at least 10 of those years by then. And then later on, it became the exact opposite, of what originally my father was giving me basically as much as I could handle, as much as I could, be involved with. And toward the end of his life, what I did, I was basically writing everything at that point, but I wanted to have him as involved as he wanted to be. If he was tired because of his age or something like that, and needed to rest or something, that was fine. We could continue without him. But if he was good and he was having a good day and he was able to participate in the process, then I was, grateful to have him there. And so that's how it was for 32 years. And it's just amazing that the relationship with Prince was actually very minimal during this whole time. I got to meet Prince myself. My father actually never met Prince, but I mean that's a whole other story. We can get to that in a minute. That was at the 2004 Grammys when we performed together, and my father and I wrote the orchestral arrangement that appeared on we opened the telecast. It was Prince. It was a duet featuring Prince and Beyonce.
Yeah.
But
okay. Wow.
But so that's a little bit of background, and then just let's
dive deeper.
Talk about.
Wow, you blew my mind. I didn't know that you guys had worked with him on that Beyonce Grammys performance. That was a classic, and we'll come back to that. Before we get into the Prince, though, there's a lot of things I want to sort of touch on. But before Prince, your father, I remember looking at there's albums. How should I say? Your father. Let me ask this question. Let me get myself together. What was it that attracted? Because it seemed to me there was a lot of soul artists, black artists, if you will, African American musicians and artists that seemed to gravitate to working with your father. If you look over the years, I see so many names that be like, whoa, okay, da da da. What was it do you think about his music that he almost seems almost the go-to person? Like if you want to have like that real lush, the strings and that whole sort of that movie, I just hear a very cinematic vibe to it. Why do you think that a lot of musicians gravitated to you?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's funny that you said at the beginning that a lot of people thought he was female because of his name. It's actually Clare with a C-L-A-I-R-E. That's a French name. That's Claire as a female name only. But Clare as C-L-A-R-E, my father's spelling, that's Irish. And in Ireland, that name can go towards men or women, kind of like the name Jean.
Okay.
And so that's how he got that name. And so not only did some people think he was female, but because my cousin, his nephew, Andre Fischer, was half black and was, basically started him out doing the string arrangements for Rufus. I mean, my dad had done a lot of string arrangements before there, but that's kind of where the soul R&B connection came in. So I think some people may have thought that he was actually black at first, and then were surprised when they get in the studio there. But that was just way at the beginning. We're talking like in the mid '70s, before my father got known, right. As this orchestral arranger for so many R&B artists. But I think the main thing that all these styles have in common, soul, R&B, gospel, and jazz is and blues, all of these have kind of this church relationship in common. I mean, a lot of jazz musicians played in church in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and then migrated over to blues, and then the development of gospel and all these other styles. It kind of came about as a result of the church, and also a lot of this music is related to jazz, or has, let's say there's more relationship between R&B and jazz than there is between, let's say, straight ahead pop and jazz. I mean, R&B just has, because of the church connection, there is more of an emphasis on these, beautiful, lush harmonies because of the choirs, and the style of music is just that much more, let's say, open to complexity. Not for complexity's sake, but it can be part of the palette that the artist, that the soul or the R&B artist can use. That's not necessarily something you would find in mainstream pop or rock music. You can find it there, but it's not as common, let's say. So I would just venture, not being I'm not a doctor of music, I'm not a musical scholar, but I would venture to make a guess that this is a big reason why he was tapped by so many great R&B artists over the years, and why I continue to do that is because of the jazz connection. That's my personal theory.
All right. And, also to put out there, it is not just sort of the strings and orchestra, but as you mentioned, there's the jazz, sort of almost like the Latin jazz stuff in there. You mentioned blues.
Yeah.
I mean, your father, there's so many different styles. I was sort of overwhelmed because I started looking online and just coming up with all this stuff. God, there's a guy I wanted to shout out, David Speed. I don't know if you, Brent, know who this person is, David Speed.
I do.
Okay, yeah. Shout out to David Speed, because he has so much great stuff for your dads that I was able to sort of look at and get a greater understanding of the music. So shout out to him for his work online. But
yeah, he's like an encyclopedia. Okay. I mean, it's just amazing. I can call him sometime. I had like we were going through some of my dad's old paperwork, and we found just like a single violin part from, I could tell by the type of printing that it was at least 30 or 40 years old. And I had a song title, and that was it. And I didn't know what it was about. I gave it to David Speed, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's the title of a song. Your dad did a string arrangement for Luther Vandross, and I forget what the year was, 1970 something or 80 something." And he had all the information right there. And so he's been an enormous help in archiving the Clare Fischer Music Library.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was amazed. So shout out to him. Before we get into Prince, though, I still want to go back to you. So this is your dad, and you're around him as he's doing these things growing up. How did you get into, what was the first instrument, and, how did your dad sort of help you or push you or guide you along this path?
Well, I mean, it was great. He actually never forced me to do it. He didn't say, "Okay, you're going to take piano lessons." He never did anything like that. But I was surrounded by his great music from birth. I mean, some of my earliest memories are of lying on a pillow underneath the grand piano with our pet dog, and cuddling up next to her when I was maybe 2 or 3 years old, and listening to him play the piano, either practicing or composing or writing an arrangement for something. And so I was just surrounded by that. And by the time he knew that I could understand that when you're in a recording studio and the red light goes on, it means do not make a single sound, because we're going to be recording everything now. So when he knew I understood that, which was about age 5.5, something like that, he started taking me into the studio. And my first instrument, the first interest that I had was in drums. From age 3 or 4, I would arrange my Tinker Toy boxes in ascending order from smallest to largest, and make them into like a mini drum set. And then he finally got me a drum set when I was about, I think, 5.5 or 6 years old, and I took to that readily. And so I got to go sit in sessions with Harvey Mason and Larry Bunker and all these great drummers that my dad was either doing an album or doing a movie or a TV date, or any one of those things. And I got to listen to those guys play. And then later on, I got interested in bass when I was a teenager, and then I would go and check out some of the great bass players that he was working with. And then it just so happened that around age 15, the bass player that was working in his group, in his Latin jazz group, which he had won a Grammy with, actually he hadn't won the Grammy at that point. But that group had a bass player that needed to move on to another project. He had some other people that he got made a deal to work with, and so my dad found himself without a bass player, and it just so happened that my capabilities at that time had gotten enough so that he felt comfortable putting me into the group. Not only that, but because I was his son and I was young, he could tell me exactly what to play, and I would follow his directions. You didn't have to worry about any of those things that you get with, like, let's say, creative differences between musicians. I would just do exactly what he told me. And so that's what I started doing at that point, was playing in his group. The first album that I made with him in 1980, that won a Grammy in 81.
Wow.
And so that was a good way to start my career. But I still went to college. I went to, because I was a drummer at first, I went to college and got a degree in symphony percussion. So I learned how to play vibraphone and marimba and timpani and all those different orchestral instruments that you see in the back of the stage when you're watching a symphony orchestra play. And those came in really handy for all the Prince stuff. I mean, right away he put me to work on a movie like Under the Cherry Moon. All the percussion you hear in there, the little snare drum taps or the timpani or crash cymbals, all that stuff, that's all me. And that was, a great experience working with professional musicians right from an early age. So I had to straighten up right away. I had to be on my game and pull my weight, because he also didn't give me any he didn't cut me any slack. There was, if I didn't do my job, he would let me know it. He was tough on me, and he was he was a demanding director when he was conducting. And I'm a better musician for it. And I think a lot of the people that work for him are better musicians, just because he was so demanding as far as, the utmost expressivity and clarity and feeling and accuracy that would have to go into making a great musical performance to be worthy of adding to music, like for somebody like Prince or Robert Palmer or any of these people that we worked with over the years.
Wow. So steel sharpens steel for sure in this situation. And I know sometimes we look at fathers and stuff and say, man, especially nowadays, it's like, go easy on him. You don't have to go. But I love, I get the sense that your dad, he wasn't playing around, right? He do this right. This is how you be great.
Yeah,
go ahead.
He had a little bit, he spent a little bit of time in the military. He was drafted in the 50s during the Korean War. He never actually saw action in Korea because they recognized his musical virtuosity right there in the in the army. He was playing piano in the barracks, and they put him to work as the band arranger and orchestrator and conductor at the military academy at West Point in New York. And so that was what he did, was music during his military career during the draft. And so he had a little bit of that upbringing. So he was pretty strict. We had to do things a certain way, and And definitely, he was in charge when he would walk into a room and stand in front of an orchestra. As a matter of fact, later on in life, he used to always wear this shirt for sessions. It was a big black shirt that he would put on to go conduct the orchestra, and it said, "Tune it or die."
God damn.
And that was, for a first time, let's say, string or horn player that's walking into a session with Clare Fischer, and they've maybe heard a little bit about him. That can be pretty intimidating. So I can tell you right then, everybody just sat at attention and paid attention to his every word and, followed all of his requests. And that's part of how we got all this great music recorded in a very minimal amount of time too, because, orchestras are very expensive. You got a lot of people on the payroll there. And even for a major record company or a major artist, it's still a big expense. And so we wanted to make sure we did everything, with the utmost of perfection, but also in as little time as possible, because you got to get these out quickly, and that was part of what I did as his orchestra manager, and what I continue to do for myself today. I'm constantly checking out all the musicians that are working with me, and assessing their strengths and weaknesses. And I know all these people by now. It's been so many years that I've been writing for them, and I know how to write for them, and I have a large base of people to choose from. So even if I can't get my first or second choice, even my third, fourth, and fifth choice are just phenomenal players. It's just a question of who I felt would be the absolute best for the particular song that I'm working on. And so that's how it was with him. He was very strict, and I feel I'm a better all-around person for having had that discipline, and that was great. Yeah, that was a great part of my upbringing.
Have you seen have you seen that movie Whiplash? Came out
No, I heard about it. I get comments from musicians that they don't think it was like very realistic according to how things are done today, and then I get other people that say, "Oh man, it seems like there must be some people that are going through stuff like that." Yeah, I would say from what I've seen of the movie, my dad was by no means like that. He wasn't like, he wasn't unnecessarily cruel or anything. I think there were some people that worked with him that might have felt that way in the heat of the moment, during a intense recording session where you're trying to get a lot of music done in a short period of time, and it's difficult, and you got a lot of things to work out and a lot of things to keep on your mind. But he was never like cruel or insulting or anything like that. He just demanded perfection, and I think the fact that we were able to give it to him the way he wanted it so many times is part of the reason why I feel like I'm able to achieve that. My style is a little mellower in the studio. I think I still command people's respect, but my dad was built like a football player. At one point, he was about 220 pounds of solid muscle, so that was an intimidating presence. I'm not that guy. And I got my mother's body type, so I'm kind of skinny like a pencil. And so I go in there, and I don't have the big commanding presence, but I think I command everybody's respect because of my, my reputation for how I work, and that I get things done quickly and efficiently, and still with attention to every last detail. And the biggest thing you're doing here is fulfilling the emotional content that is part of the creative vision of the artist. And in the case of Prince, it was an incredible amount of work that he did, and so much of it unreleased. I would say probably 70% of the music that we recorded for Prince remains unreleased to this day.
Well, since you opened that up, so because I'm gonna go into the parade, but before we get into that, then just to jump on this, you say you think there's like 70% of the work that you guys did. What years? And not going into naming songs or any of that sort of thing, but in terms of the years where you guys worked with him the most, was there's a lot of stuff in the 80s or late 80s, or you kind of remember when most of your stuff was done?
Yeah, I mean, the first project for Prince the artist was the Parade album, Under the Cherry Moon movie. Dad had worked for Prince the producer before that, and that was, I think, while I was just beginning college, so I wasn't even part of those projects.
Like the family album?
Yes, the family album, and I think there were a couple of other artists too. I remember also one of the first things we did after Parade was we worked on the Jill Jones album.
Yes.
After that, and so I was involved in that project, and that was a lot of fun. Wow. But so that's where we started, and then there were just at first there in 1986, 1987, it was pretty much nonstop. I mean, I just kind of we just kind of had to drop a lot of other things that we were doing and take care of all these Prince projects, and then we kind of settled into a rhythm where he would send a couple of tunes our way every once in a while, and then we wouldn't hear from him for a while, and then he'd send some more, and then maybe a big project would come up, and we'd do a lot of stuff for about a year, and then take some time off and go work with some other artists, and that continued all the way up. Gosh, I want to say until 2010 or something like that. And that's when he started getting into the different new bands that he was starting, and it was becoming more, I think, well, let's say less of an emphasis on like a large ensemble type of situation where you'd want to have orchestra in there. And he was focusing more on smaller groups, smaller bands that he had put together, and maybe just a small horn section instead of having an orchestra going on. And actually, I mean, the orchestra, as far as live performances with Prince, there really was just that one time. Aside from that, all of this stuff was done just for the records or for the movies, like Graffiti Bridge.
All right. Go ahead.
Yeah. So that's how we started around 1986. And then it was, just sort of off and on. And we never knew when the next time was that we were going to hear from him would be. That's why I was kind of hoping that, there would have been some time this decade that we would have been able to do something together again. But sadly, that was not to be. I mean, it's still just kind of shocked to think about it.
Right.
At this point, because we just always assumed that this thing would be continuing, and he knew I was involved with all this stuff. There was, like I said, there was this gradual transition between me assisting my father at the beginning and then becoming a co-writer with him mid-career, and then finally just him basically handing over the business to me towards the end there, and I ended up doing all the writing myself, and I think because of our unique relationship with Prince, it was a very easy transition. It was a very easy way to go about doing these things. And I should probably get into why the relationship with Prince was almost completely long distance, and it's a very simple reason for that. Prince was supposed to show up to the first orchestral date that we had going for the Parade album in 1986. Our plan was to take 2 songs at a time on the album, and I'd go and transcribe the song first, then I'd consult with my dad while he was writing the arrangement, and once he put everything together and had it all ready to go, we'd go into the studio with an orchestra, and within a typical 3-hour session, we could get 2 of those songs recorded. 2 of the songs tracked with full orchestra, 2 or 3 takes each. So we had a good choice of material to choose from. Then we'd send a rough mix to Prince, and so that was our working operation. But even from the first recording session, they sent the tapes out. We added orchestra on, and we noticed, Prince, just for whatever reason, he couldn't make it to this session. I think his schedule changed. He had some things come up, and he couldn't get out to LA. And so he did not attend. But when he heard the results of the recording, he called my dad right away, and he said, I'm so pleased with the way this came out, and I'm just thinking, had I been there, things might have gone differently. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it just might have gone differently. So because I'm so happy with the way things came out, I will never attend a Fischer orchestra recording session.
Wow.
And he never did. He never did for his entire life. It was always send us the music, we'd add orchestra on, and then we'd send it back. And sometimes we wouldn't hear anything from him until finally we'd hear that the music was on the album that he released. Sometimes the song wouldn't get released. Every once in a while we get a thank you note, and that was the way it went for many, many years. He just kept on sending music out, and the contact was always, or generally through his assistants. Every once in a while over the years we'd have some details to go over, and we'd have a phone conference together. And then actually at that one point I did meet him at the 2004 Grammys, because I was performing in the orchestra with him and Beyonce to open the show. So everything else besides that, I guess people told me that Prince felt like he didn't want to jinx the working relationship. I think those were his words exactly. I don't want to jinx the relationship, because he felt it was going so good. And as a matter of fact, there was one year when my dad won a Grammy for another one of his Latin jazz albums. This is the second one. And so Prince asked for the album so he could check it out. And so we gave it to Prince's assistant. And she said that when she went to hand Prince the album, he turned his head away and he said, "Just put it on. I want to listen to it, but I don't want to see what Clare Fischer looks like, because I have this image of him in my head and I don't want to change it."
Wow.
So he really just wanted to keep a distance, because he felt so good about the way things are going, and he maintained that distance throughout his entire life. And I think we were one of the few people that worked on a regular basis with Prince who did not have any regular contact with him.
Wow. Such speaks to the level of trust that he had in you guys, like, because this is his music, this is his baby, this is, the music for Prince is everything, from my just outside looking at it, and for him to be able to just say, "You guys got it, do you." I can imagine it was probably exceeded his expectations on what it sounded like so much, or he was like, yeah, if I would have been there, maybe it would have been, he probably never imagined it would sound like that, and it was just probably blew his mind, like, wow. I can just, speculating, but God, that's amazing.
Go ahead. Well, that's funny that you say that, because I've heard those exact words just, a few years ago, adding some orchestra onto some music for another artist, and he was there in the studio, but he basically just stayed there and didn't say a word for most of the time. And so I got a little worried, and I looked over and said, "So how's everything going? How you doing?" And he said, "Man, you're just exceeding my expectations so much. I don't know what to say. I'm just silent. That's okay, man. I'm just a fly in the wall. Keep doing what you're doing." Wow. And but then after that, he kind of loosened up, and we started talking about ideas, and we started going over details. And so I think that kind of broke the ice for him. And then we could have a little bit back and forth, which is great to be able to do that with an artist. And actually that did not happen with Prince. There was no back and forth. He would send the music basically as close to the final mix as he could make it without the orchestra being there. And actually, I still ask for my current clients to do things that way. Send me your music in as final a form as you can give it to me without the orchestra being there, and then I will put my part on, and that's going to make it easy for me to address every nut and bolt of the sonic architecture. I want to go deep inside the construction, and I want to address every detail, and I want to support and complement your artistry. I want to wrap everything in sort of this orchestral velvet and just give it this lush treatment here. And the other thing I really liked about Prince is that he didn't just give us ballads. A lot of people associate having strings or having an orchestra with a soulful ballad, but we did plenty of up-tempo tunes for Prince, and there were a lot of ballads in there. There's no doubt about that. But even right from the first song,
Christopher Tracy's Parade,
which, by the way, was originally, when we got it, it was titled Wendy's Parade.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
And
let me ask you about that. Just the beginning of that. So. I don't know when you guys got this music, 85 or 84.
Yeah, I think it was the end of 85, beginning of 86.
Okay. And this is when Prince was, he was, I won't say at his height, but he was at one of his heights. He was he's one of the biggest artists in the world. I don't know how much you knew of Prince prior to that, and maybe you can say that, but what did you guys think, you and your father think of the music that he gave to you at that time? Like, what were you expecting it to sound like?
Right. And I was listening to a lot more of the, popular music than my dad at the time. I also had more time than he did. I can relate to the way he was back then because I'm kind of that way right now. There are often times as an arranger when you're so busy writing all the time to get these arrangements out that you don't have a chance to listen to a lot of music except for the music that you're working on. And so, but when I was in college, I had a little more free time than he did because he was busy, writing arrangements day and night for different people all the time. And so he wasn't that familiar with Prince's work, aside from just, every once in a while seeing something on MTV or hearing something on the radio. But I loved all the work Prince did on Purple Rain. I think that's where I really came to know about him. I had heard, I was aware of him also from listening to the radio before that. But I think Purple Rain was, the big wake up call for everybody. Yeah. And that here, ladies and gentlemen, here's Prince. And he definitely had his fans before then, but they just really multiplied after that. And so. So that's part of, I think, what made it easy for me to and very enjoyable for me to transcribe all these songs, to write out everything that Prince had played and Prince's musicians had played and sang on the recordings there. Not only was it a great experience for me, but I was even thinking to myself at the time, I'm the first guy that gets to hear this, right? It's not on the radio yet. It hasn't even been finalized. So I'm like one of the first people here outside of the recording studio in Minneapolis that get to hear this music and enjoy it. And so I did. And I think another reason why Prince was so trusting with us is that we never betrayed his trust in all those years. We never leaked out any sort of bootleg recordings, or we never even talked with other people a lot about what these projects were because he wanted to, surprise people with things. When we got the cassette tape that had all the basic tracks on it for the Parade album, I think he had even put a code name on there. I think it was called the Marx Brothers Project or something like that. Oh. And so, he just didn't want anybody to know about anything until he was ready to let them know about it. And we were completely understanding of that fact and never leaked anything out. And so I think that was another reason why he was able to try, or I would hope that was a great part of the trust that we had with each other. And I keep that trust with other artists too. I'm not going to let anybody hear anything. I was working on the D'Angelo project for quite a while. He contacted me in 2010. Wow. I started doing the writing on it in 2012. Then he did a lot of tweaks after I put on my orchestra, and finally released it in 2014, 2015. So that was 5 years there that I did not talk to anybody about the new D'Angelo album because I didn't want to spoil the surprise.
That was a guy was playing that song today, Really Love.
Yeah.
Oh, did we lose you?
Yeah, so that was that's part of what you have to do when you're working behind the scenes here is you have to keep everything behind the scenes until they're ready until the artist or whoever you're working for is ready for the public to hear that.
When you guys were doing the parade under Cherry Moon, did you guys actually also score any parts of the movie, or did he just lift things that you did from the songs and used in the movie in background sections?
That's an excellent question, because this is a very interesting way to put a movie together, and I don't think it had been used very much up to that point, or maybe never. I don't know if Prince was the first one to come up with this idea, but basically, yeah, he took everything from what we had put on the Parade album, and then he incorporated that into the Under the Cherry Moon movie. And then also he would, every once in a while, he would go and he would lift some tracks, like maybe he would because he's had and listened to everything, But when we sent stuff back, first he listened to the rough mix to get the overall picture. Then he wanted to go in the forest and check out every single tree. So then he would start playing, one track at a time, or a group of tracks at a time. Let's just listen to all the cellos, or let's just listen to all of the, all the trumpets, or all the French horns, or any of these other, more unusual orchestral instruments that both my father and I use as kind of our signature to differentiate our sound from other composers. So not only are the ideas different, the harmonic vocabulary, the writing ideas differentiated, but also the orchestral instrumental makeup is different from a standard orchestra that you might see performing in a at a concert of Beethoven music or whatever. So that's part of what we did, and in being able to pick the orchestration for each song to kind of independently select it was a great part of the process, and so all those different tracks with all those different instruments then were used occasionally by Prince to use as kind of background music behind a scene. But then there finally were a couple of scenes in the movie where he just couldn't find anything, and so he needed to have something composed actually that would be specifically for that scene, not to appear on the album. And so at that point, he sent us a recording of it. And I transcribed it, and I was talking about it with Dad, and he thought, if I'm going to be writing this for a scene, I need to look at the scene. I need to know what's going on in the movie. And so I contacted Prince's assistant, and I said, is there any way you guys can send us a videotape just of that scene so we can check it out? And they said, yeah, we will. And so, we didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks, but then all of a sudden there was a knock at the door one day. I just happened to be over at my dad's house. It was good timing. He was upstairs, and I was hanging out downstairs. So the door, there was a knock on the door, and I opened up the door, and there was a limo driver standing there with a videotape in his hand, and there was a purple limousine in the background, and down at the edge of the driveway. And I said, yes. And he said, are you Clare Fischer? I said, oh, is that the videotape? And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, I can take that. And he said, no, I have explicit instructions to deliver this to the hands of Clare Fischer. And so, so I yelled upstairs, hey, Dad, this guy has a video for you. And so my dad came downstairs and took the video, said, thank you. They left, and then Dad handed me the video and said, here, I don't know how to work the video machine. Put it in, watch it. And so that's what we did. And so that was, the first scene that we got to watch out of, Under the Cherry Moon before it was actually released. And so there were some things that went on like that, but everything else from the movie was lifted basically from tracks that were meant to go with Sometimes It Snows in April, or any of the other songs that ended up being part of the album and the movie.
Do you remember what scene that was that you guys looked at?
Oh man, I think I remember the. No, it was just every scene had kind of like a number. It was like 103-X or something like that. I'm sorry, I can't remember now. It's been, it has been 31 years. Right. Yeah, if I went back and watched the movie again, I'd probably be able to isolate it
All right. What did you guys?
But yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah.
Well, what did you?
Well,
and your,
you can recognize it because it won't be anything that you heard on the
oh,
Parade
okay.
album.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
What did you and your father think of two things: the album when it was released, and hearing? I would imagine. Actually, I've seen a thing you guys did at the Red Bull Academy many years ago, and I'm so mad because I live in Seattle. I don't know why I did not know you guys were at that particular Red Bull Academy, and I was actually at that event. So bad, Michael.
Oh,
but
man.
yeah, I was slipping. But I know you guys played. I've heard you guys play like here's sort of, untouched our sort of stuff, and then here's sort of how it came out released. But I'm curious, what did you guys think of the album when it was released, and you hear the final sort of mix of what was used and what wasn't, and where it was placed?
Yeah, I mean, we were very pleased with the way it came out. Every once in a while, you write something for an artist, and it ends up being way in the background. As far as mix wise, it's just very, very far in the background. It's kind of hard to hear, but it's providing a context for the song, and that's its place in the song, and so we're completely willing to accept that. There's no problem with that. But then to have this stuff come out with Prince and actually many of the other artists that I've worked for, where they want not just to have a string background, but they want the orchestra to actually be, part of the infrastructure, let's say, of the main element of the song. I mean, that was a great experience, and we've had a couple other things like that happen. There was a violin line that my dad wrote for "You Push Me Away" for the Jackson 5, and they liked that violin line so much they had their guitarist duplicate it. It appears in the middle of the piece someplace. So that's like really the orchestra.
That's on the Destiny album.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
Man,
your history.
Oh
yeah,
man, that song is incredible.
I was a little kid then.
That's an incredible Mike. Well, I associated with Michael Jackson, but yeah, God, I didn't know that he worked.
And another thing that happened to me was the fact that I decided to write that prelude for Really Love.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I knew because of the way the tracks were sent to me that D'Angelo wanted something there at the beginning, but I gave him about 35 seconds of just solid orchestra before the first sound of his recording actually comes in. And they kept that on the album. I was fully expecting that it could be edited down a little bit, or they might just decide to cut to the part where the final chord of my prelude sets up the entrance of the band. But they kept the whole thing in there, and I've gotten a lot of really fabulous comments from people about their feelings about how that sets the stage for the entrance of D'Angelo's band. And so that's, when stuff like that happens, and this is exactly the case with Parade and with the Under the Cherry Moon movie as well. It's just the orchestra was prominently featured, not, I don't feel it ever became overbearing at any point or obstructing anything. I mean, that's also because of the writing. You want to write in a way that complements everything so that it doesn't, you don't want to step on anybody's toes. And I think that's a very important thing to remember when you are arranging songs, especially when people are doing covers now, that they're making a new version of a hit song, doing a cover. And, some of those come out really great. And I think the ones that really come out well are the ones where they really pay attention to keeping the essence of the original song intact while giving it a new treatment.
Wow.
And that's just a great, that's part of the craft, of the craft of arranging, I think, which really helps set apart the guys that are really excellent from people who are just kind of filling in bars, and because there are plenty of that. There's times when you just need background music. A lot of times in TV shows, people just want background music. Nothing that anybody's gonna buy a soundtrack album of it later on and listen to it. It's just background music. That's fine. That's the purpose of that. But we're trying to do things here that have some interest beyond that. And actually, I mean, it's great to see that college professors, music professors, are studying a lot of this stuff, and that they're analyzing it. And I mean, one of the great music educators of today when it comes to all of these related genres is Questlove. I mean, I got a chance to work with him too when I did that album with Elvis Costello and the Roots, and that was a great experience. But then I also really got to know Questlove, the scholar and the educator, and the archiver. He's just amazing what he's doing, and so so this is great to see that people are not just studying music by Mozart anymore in colleges. They're studying stuff that Prince did or whatever. Any of these great albums that have been made all through the decades that are finally getting recognition in academic circles as well. Besides just the general public, and now these tunes have become classics that people have so many great memories in their life associated with. And it's my great honor that one of the memories that I associate with listening to all these great old Prince recordings is the fact that I remember being there in the studio, and I remember, songs like Old Friends for Sale or any of these things that we did, that we got to, go in there. First, we got to listen to the music before anybody else. And second, I got to write it all out, and then I got to participate in this whole process that leads to getting the orchestra added on, and the final mix that comes out as the recording that becomes available to the public. That's just a great part of my life that I will always treasure. And I'm still doing it with other artists, with other artists now, and that's just it's been an amazing journey, and I am grateful for every moment.
Yes, sir. And you just mentioned Old Friends for Sale. So that's one of those songs. Now, again, as a fan, we remember hearing about the song. I think it was first mentioned in a Rolling Stone interview Prince had. Right. That was so, and before it came out or anything like that. So we were always primed to like, oh, this song is the song that really Prince is really talking about some stuff going on around him at the time. And then, the song doesn't come out sort of after that interview. It doesn't come out for many, 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 many years later. But, a bootleg of it surfaces at some point many years later. And when you hear that orchestration and all that come on, it to me reminds me so much of the parade and around the world sort of era, and it just comes in and it's so like almost like just something that cuts across, but it all works, and it's so cinematic to me. When I'm a really much of a movie soundtrack type of guy. John Williams, that's the first album I ever got in my life was the Star Wars, the first movie. Vinyl, so that my ears are sort of tuned to appreciate that type of stuff. But when your thing comes on with Old Friends for Sale, man, that is one of those head-busting moments from a Prince fan. Just like your jaw drops, and it's like, whoa, you never heard anything like that before. And it's like, gosh, this is so amazing. Like I can't imagine. So when you kind of jog my memory when you mentioned that, I totally like kind of forgot that was one of your best pieces of work, man, you and your dad. And also I have to throw in too, Crystal Ball.
And that was another one. We tracked the orchestra for that in 1986.
Wow.
And when was it released? 98, 99, right?
Yeah.
And, Prince sent the final CD when it came out, again, a very nice thank you note. And And then, only years later to find out that that was supposed to be part of a 3-album set that included all the material from Sign of the Times, and then the record company wouldn't let Prince do that. And there was, I mean,
Right.
we found out about all that stuff later on. We didn't know any of this because we're right in the thick of it. We're just dealing with one project after another, and again, just totally on the music side, not getting into the politics or the intrigue or anything that was surrounding about that. So it's amazing for me here to have participated in the process, but only learn about what went on,
Behind.
let's say all this stuff that went into making that song or those songs, besides the music part, all the negotiations and the disagreements or agreements or epiphanies that happened, or any of the things like that happened, sort of the extra musical stuff that went into the production. It's amazing for me to find out about that later, because we were completely unaware of any of that stuff at the time. At the time, we were just, okay, on to the next project. Let's go, keep going, get it done.
Do you there's a piece on the Graffiti Bridge album. Actually, I believe it's just before the song Graffiti Bridge, and there's this whole orchestra piece that comes on, and when I hear it, when I remember when it first came out, and I'm like, I said, God, that's got to be some Clare Fischer. I mean, it just sounds, again, I sort of associated with Under the Cherry Moon because that was sort of the first things I've heard, and I'm like, this is that style. I'm like, and then it goes, boom, 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 boom. Everybody wants. Did you guys do that piece, or was that piece lifted from something else? Do you remember? You even know what I'm talking about?
Oh boy! If you finally caught me, you caught me twice a day. After so many years, I just I would have to go back and listen to it again to be able to give you a definitive answer. But I don't remember a lot of other things being lifted. I can tell you one example for sure that we were surprised that we heard orchestra on that song for the Batman soundtrack in 1987, because we don't remember being called for any of those projects, but we found out that it was
Scandalous.
The orchestra tracks were lifted from another song. I think that he never ended up using. It was one of those songs that went unreleased, but so he lifted the orchestra tracks and just put them in the background of this other song for the Batman soundtrack, because he wanted to have unrelated sort of kind of unrelated orchestral noise in the background, essentially. So it's it's a different tempo, it's a different beat, it's a different key. Everything was basically unrelated, and I think that was his specific reason for wanting to do it at that point. But I'm not aware of too many other things besides that. I think. Everything else, there was a specific purpose, and there may have been times when he said, write introduction to this, what I call a prelude. That's probably the more standard term, is write an introduction to this before the band comes in. Go ahead and write something with the orchestra, and so that may have been the case.
Okay.
And yeah. So, but I don't know of too many other examples besides that where things were.
Let me throw a couple of them at you. Just
sure.
I'm curious. There's one in particular, the Kama Sutra.
That
release.
Project I know well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's perfect, because I remember, and I can respect, not wanting to speak on certain things in the process. So you let me know when that's the situation. But I remember when that sort of leaked a little earlier before it came out, and it sounded like it was maybe just Prince's take on that piece, and who he may have worked with on the horns and stuff. Did you guys? So when you guys get this, are you? God, I'm all over the place. Do you listen to that and say, "Wow, he's actually doing these sort of orchestral string parts with the computer, not with the computer, with the keyboard"?
Yeah.
And then, do you just sort of follow along, or did you add things to that too? Like I said, I know there's the release version, which you guys must have worked on, but I'm just curious what you thought of his sort of coming to you with something that's already like, hey, this is my sort of orchestra
Absolutely. This is another. I'm glad you brought that up, because this is a perfect example right there. This is a little bit after Prince had gotten his synclavier, and synclavier at the time was the foremost electronic device for trying to mimic orchestral type sounds. And that was before samples. That was before all that stuff. And they, there's been this this kind of attempt over the last 20 years to try and get closer and closer to having a sampled sound, be able to sound like a real instrument. And they've got all these nuances that they build into the sound. You can never approach the hundreds of thousands of nuances that a great flute or viola player is capable of producing on a fine instrument, fine musician on a fine instrument. But at that time, that was what the technology that existed for him to be able to do that. And this is, I think, one of the early examples of actually Clare Fischer being an influence on Prince. So in other words, we had done enough projects with Prince at that time so that he was, he was really studying this stuff. He'd take it and he'd listen to everything track by track. He wanted to know what was going on in great detail. And so he let that influence him. And so the result was they sent us these tracks for Kama Sutra, and that was an incredible project to work on. First of all, because it was him doing things track by track on, in an orchestral fashion. So in other words, he was thinking of things in terms of, here's the oboe part, here's the trombone part, here's the cello part, and let me get all these in one by one, as opposed to, let me put on the piano, guitar, bass first, and then the drums, and then we'll add orchestra later. So he was contemplating, writing for the orchestra in the initial stages of making, putting the music together. And the way that worked out was just incredible, because another technological development that happened at that time was the 48-track digital tape. So before then, you had 24 tracks available to you on a tape, and if you went past 24 tracks, you had to make a decision. You were going to have to maybe bounce multiple tracks over to one track so you could clear up space and make room to add additional tracks. But with the 48 track, you had less of a problem with that, because you had so much room there to fill in, so many tracks to fill in. And so that's what we had to end up doing. It had gotten, to the point with some of those recordings that Prince had done, even before that. I remember some times where the music was so thick on the cassette tape that I would get to do my transcription that I could be sure that I was being fairly accurate with whatever was going on. But there are also, by the time you stack that many instruments on top of each other, there's a process called masking that goes on, where you have basically the sharpest sound will predominate, and anything that's below it in the same auditory region is going to get kind of covered up. So you won't be able to hear every single detail. And so at that point, we asked that Prince send the 24-track tape, and I would go into the studio and I'd transcribe that thing track by track. I'd still listen to the cassette for the rough mix, so I knew exactly what was important to Prince, what was the predominant feature in that section of the song. But I was also taking everything down track by track. So his horn players' parts, I could listen to each one independently, and then I could listen to the guitar parts and all the different layers that he was adding on there, that I could get those written out note for note. And so we had to do that with Kama Sutra too, only this time I had a 48-track tape to deal with. And I went into the studio, and we actually had 2 days, because I was getting ready to leave for a European tour with a band that I was working with at the time. And so what we did was we transcribed in a 10 or 12-hour session. I sat there with an engineer, and I transcribed as much as I could of those 48 tracks for Kama Sutra. And it's a long song, it was like between the overture and the other song was, 13, 16 something minutes of music. And so I had to transcribe all that as much as I could before I had to hop on a plane. And then I had the engineer make me a series of cassette tapes with this track pushed forward, or this series of tracks, make me a mix with all the horn tracks pushed forward, then make me a mix with all the keyboard tracks pushed forward, then another mix with all the whatever the guitar layers pushed forward. So then I could do further transcription while I was in Europe. And I tell you, it took me like 2 or 3 weeks transcribing literally on planes, trains, in buses, automobiles, in hotel rooms. Everywhere we went, I had at that time a Walkman, Sony Walkman with me and my headphones, and I had a little tiny 1 foot long keyboard, a little electric keyboard that was battery powered. So I could use it on an airplane. I could use it anywhere. Just put it on my tray table in the airplane, or on my seat on a train, anywhere where we were going in Europe. Even if people had invited the band over to hang out at somebody's house, I would usually hang out for a little bit, but then I'd say, do you have a private room I can go into? And then I would sit in there and I would start transcribing, because I had to get that done. And I got it done in between, performances and traveling and all that stuff. And so I sent that back to LA, faxed everything, faxed all the transcriptions. My dad already had a copy of the tape over there, so he could listen to the music and look at the transcription. And then he got started. And then by the time I got back from my tour, then they were ready to put on the full orchestral recording and add my percussion parts. So that was a great, that was adding Clare Fischer Orchestra to Prince's orchestra, in a sense.
Wow.
With the stuff that he did with the stuff that Prince did on Clavier, adding the live and real orchestra to the Clavier orchestra, and in some places, having the orchestra play some of Prince's lines, and then in other places making counter lines or let's say polyphony, so it's multiple counter lines against some of the lines that Prince had going on. And that was just a great experience. A long time. That was a long project for, when you're just talking about putting that whole thing together, because it was very, very involved, very detailed. That was one of the first times we were working with a 48 tape.
Wow. Yeah, it's an amazing piece of music. And it's such.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, once Pro Tools came out, you have unlimited tracks, so that it even got more. Could get at even more complicated at times, but we always had that capability then, to be able to hear the parts track by track, to make sure we were, again, addressing every sonic detail as carefully as possible.
Now I'm going to ask an oddball question, because I'm looking at your Wikipedia thing and so many amazing collaborations here, but I'm going to ask the dumb question. There's something, it's called the Zapp String Quartet. Now, school me, because when I see ZAPP, I think of Roger Troutman. So that wasn't a Roger Troutman String Quartet, was it?
No. This was, it was a very this is a very interesting group in Holland. It was they were just a string quartet. Okay. All improvising players. And so I wrote, they commissioned me to write a piece for them, where it was not only just like an official classical string quartet piece like you'd hear in a concert hall, but it also gave each one of them room to solo. And that was the amazing thing, that these guys had solo chops, and they could do as great riffs as any great guitarist that you've ever heard. I mean, came up with so many different ideas. So it was a great collaboration with those guys. Later on, I ended up writing a big band composition based on that string quartet, and we recorded it with the Clare Fischer Latin Jazz Big Band on an album that unfortunately my father got to hear most of the material on that album. Actually, he heard everything on that album in rough mix form. But we didn't finish recording it and release it until about 6 months after he passed away, and then that album won a Grammy. So that was another great experience. Even getting to work with my father posthumously, much like when I did "This Is It" for Michael Jackson, that was posthumous. He had already passed away, and they found that recording of that song "This Is It," and at that point I added orchestra on. And wow. Yeah, it was a great thing to be able to do. And the way that my cousin Andre had helped Natalie Cole record some music with her father posthumously. So I've been able to record music with other people posthumously as well, and it's a very fulfilling experience to realize that that the music lives on even when the people are not here. And I think that's one of the great things about the Prince legacy is there's so much music and it lives on, and it will be here. It will be here for people to marvel at and to enjoy and to study. Now that scholars are getting interested in. And it's a great thing that we are able to leave these things behind as we pass on.
All right, a couple other quick questions. Just I see some of these artists that I love, and I know some of these songs. Raphael Sadiq. What was the name of the album? Gosh, you got me, but I know you did some stuff with Raphael on
Quite a bit, yeah.
What's the song?
That was also a long-term relationship. We did actually meet with him. We both my father and I met Raphael and recorded at his studio, and we tracked the orchestra in front of him, and I've done some things with Raphael since my father has passed away, and so that's been another great long distance relationship. Not long distance. I mean, we did get to work together, but again, it's he leaves us to do our stuff, and then we bring it to the studio and put it down, and it's a great working relationship.
One of the early joints that I remember is you guys worked on It's Our Anniversary. Didn't you guys do like a long piece in that? Yeah.
And It Never Rains in Southern California, the big Tony hits. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Those are great. And I mean the other thing that I should just briefly mention. I mean, when we got this call from Prince's assistant at the beginning of 2004 to do this thing for the Grammys. I mean, we didn't even know what it was going to be for. He just said, I have this medley. I think they're going to put it on the Grammy telecast. And it was like, right before this time, I was getting ready to go on a vacation, and I had my plane ticket booked and everything. And all of a sudden, he sends me this song, and I listened to it, and it's this kind of like greatest hits medley. And I thought, this is unbelievable, because not only are these some of the hits that we got a chance to work on over the decades, but this has even got songs like Purple Rain on it before we ever met Prince. So now we do get to write an orchestral arrangement to go along with at least part of this part of Purple Rain that appears in the medley. And so I basically called the airlines, and I cut my vacation time down to like half, and then as they worked through all the negotiations and details of how this whole production was going to come together, by the time that happened, I was back from my vacation, and we got to, again, that was at the point where I was co-writing with my father. So it was a situation like we had to get it done in a hurry, and he would write all day on it, I would write all night, and then we'd continue until it was finished. And then we actually got to meet Prince that day, or I did. When I went there, I was talking with Prince's assistant, and I said, is there anything Prince wants to go over before we do the rehearsal? Which basically that's it. That performance, we had a half-hour rehearsal, and during that same time we did a sound check, and then we did a dress rehearsal where we just played the song once the next morning, and then the third time that we played the song was there at the Grammy performance live on TV. Wow. And so I met Prince briefly. I shook his hand, and I told him, I can't tell you what a great pleasure it's been to work for you all these decades. It's been amazing. And he said, thank you. And then we got right down to business, talking about the song, what was going to happen, what was going to happen on the stage, different things that were going to be going on. And then he, during that conversation, he told me, I heard your dad's here. I still don't want to meet him. I don't want to jinx the working relationship, so please, understand. And I said, sure, that's fine. I totally understand. And so we did our rehearsal, and my dad stayed in the, in one of the side rooms, and he was watching everything on the camera screens. They were showing the camera footage on a screen inside one of the rooms. And so he's checking it out. And then the craziest thing happened on the day of the Grammys. We getting ready to go on stage, and I didn't even realize at that point we were opening the show. All that stuff kind of became more apparent as we got through the process. First, it was just basically we're going to, add orchestra and do it live with Prince, and then it became that Beyonce was involved, and I didn't realize it at first because the original tape that I got was Prince singing all the melodies, even the Beyonce melodies. So we didn't know that she was there until we got to the Grammys, and then we're getting ready to go on stage, and there's this huge ramp at Staples Center Arena in Los Angeles that leads up to the backstage area. And, my dad was pretty old at that point. And so I was walking behind him because I wanted to make sure he would, in case he took a misstep while he was walking up this very steep ramp, that I was there to help him. So I was watching his feet. And once I was sure that he was on his feet and he was good to go and he was making his way up the ramp and I was walking behind him there, I looked up and I noticed that just to my father's left is Prince, walking up the stage, the same ramp, at least not more than 2 feet from Clare Fischer, and they're basically walking up the stage at the same pace together, just very casually, relaxed and just making their way up the stage. Prince has got his guitar on, and the first thought that comes into my head is, oh my gosh, this is these two men have never met each other, and I was like, let me tap him on the shoulder, say, hey, Clare Fischer, meet Prince. Prince, here's Clare Fischer. But then I remembered, that's my first instinct is let's introduce these guys. But then I remembered Prince's whole philosophy for all those years, and so I just decided to respect it right then. So I held myself back, and they did not meet. Even they were standing a foot away from each other as they were walking up to go onto stage there at Staples Center in Los Angeles. Wow. And so my dad stood on the sidelines there for a little bit of it. Then I think he went back down and sat in the green room, and he hung out with, Steve Tyler and Joe Perry, because they were getting ready to present a Grammy right after that. And so he hung out with them while we were doing the performance, and everything went really great. And there was never any problem, but they still did not meet that day, even though they were standing right next to each other. So it's just an amazing experience that I will always remember, and just a great experience that it was my honor to be, to actually share a stage with Prince after working for him for so many years in a sort of behind the scenes fashion. It's incredible.
Amazing. Wow. That's a mind-blowing thing that they've never met, but I respect it. Like, gosh, that's incredible. Man, there's so much to talk about, and we've already had a lot of time, but we'd be remiss to not acknowledge and really your career unto itself is incredible. The work you continue to do is incredible. A few songs that I was just checking out that were amazing to me, and one I think fits into, we're in the Christmas time right now, is the stuff you did with Toni Braxton on her Christmas album years ago. You have an entire track to yourself on there, or a song on there, where it's just
I was really happy with the way that worked out. And it's listed on the back of the CD as they have 2 different versions on there. It was originally supposed to be, a vocal version, her singing along with me and the orchestra. And that one, I wrote that arrangement from the ground up. So I wrote out the bass parts and the drum part and the keyboard part and everything, besides all the orchestra parts. And we tracked that with her voice. And then they decided that they wanted to make 2 versions because they liked the way my instrumental version came out so much that they told me they wanted it to be featured. So it's a bonus CD. A bonus track on the CD, and it actually is credited on the back of the album as "Snowflakes of Love," Brent Fischer instrumental.
Yes.
And so that was a great honor, and I've gotten notes from people over the years that this is like one of my favorite Christmas songs. I pull this out every year and listen to it, and I mean it's just so fulfilling when you do something like that, and it actually. It actually touches people the way that it does, and that's why I'm hoping that one day more of this unreleased Prince material is going to somehow get released, and that I will be able to participate in the mixing of of how the orchestra blends in with the rest of the group, or at least to have a voice in that would be it would be a great thing. I also I did the orchestra for the Sheila E. tribute song that she made after Prince passed away, and so that was a phenomenal thing, and yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for mentioning that, and yeah. So what else? What else is?
Well, a couple things. Because there is so much music and there's so much before Prince, and I think with your father and stuff, can you give some of the listeners, because this is, this is school for us right now. Where can some of the listeners start? What are some of the albums you would recommend of your father's that, hey, start at this, go get this one, and sort of make your way through?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it depends. I mean, as far as Clare Fischer, the artist, it depends on whether you want to hear his keyboard work, in which case there are some early albums that he did in the 60s and 70s. I think a lot of those are available through clarefischer.com. I mean, we have our own store there, but you can also find them on CD, some of them on CD Baby and Amazon and all the regular outlets. But I mean, as far as the work that he eventually ended up doing with his Latin jazz group, where he ended up getting serious attention and winning Grammys, that's stuff that he did in the 80s. There was an album that we made called Free Fall. That's the one that Prince actually listened to without looking at the cover, because he didn't want to see what Clare Fischer looked like. And so the album that we made, Free Fall, that was 1986. And then after that, we got more doing like some large ensemble stuff. I mean, I kind of revived the Clare Fischer Big Band. My dad had made some Clare Fischer Big Band recordings in the 70s, and then I revived it in 2010, and we put out a number of Clare Fischer Big Band albums. One of them won a Grammy in 2013, and the name of that album is Ritmo, which means rhythm in Spanish. And then he has an orchestral album that I produced for him in 2013, and that won a Grammy in 2014, and that was called Music for Strings, Percussion, and the Rest. Okay. And meaning the rest of the instruments, all the rest of it, but it's featuring strings and percussion quite a bit on that album. And so yeah, just Google Clare Fischer when you get a chance. Read about him on Wikipedia, about all the amazing things that he did, and then the albums are available on all the major retail sites. Okay. And so that will give people a great great insight into all the other things that Clare Fischer did, and there are so many things. And then it's just a question of all the different artists that you have mentioned that both he and I have worked for over the years. There are many. The discography, is getting pretty big. I have to update it. Yeah, man. Periodically, every once in a while, I'll find out. I mean, obviously, I have to update my own discography for new projects that I'm doing. Right now, I've got an album that I did for this incredible Australian keyboardist Simon Pilbrow that I gave him the works. I did big band arrangements for him. I did string orchestrations and all different types of stuff for that, and that's climbing the jazz radio charts right now. So you can hear that on your jazz radio stations in your own city. And so I, every once in a while I have to update my discography because there's a new album that I'm doing. But I also have to update my father's discography, even though he's not making any albums anymore. Every once in a while I'll discover an album that he did for somebody that, because he did so many, appeared on so many albums, something like 400 albums for different artists during his career. And some of these, that happened when I was a kid, I was unaware of things, and things get lost, as you go through the years. And it's only later on that I realized that, that he worked with, like the great Brazilian composer, guitarist, Antonio Carlos Jobim, or, that he did early projects with Charles Lloyd, the great jazz sax player, and Freddie Hubbard and Dizzy Gillespie. Wow. All these great jazz trumpet players and incredible. There was a Latin jazz group that he played in before he made his own Latin jazz group, and that was Cal Jader. It's Cal Jader's Latin jazz group, and that was they used to travel around the world and do major tours and jazz festivals. So that was another great experience that he had. And my dad took me along on those tours sometime. I was 13 or 14 years old at the time. He let me stay up and brought me into the nightclubs so I could see these jazz clubs and these smoky jazz clubs that they were working in, and got to listen and study everything. And that was part of my training, even before I started getting my college degree. That was part of my music training right there that led me to where I am today.
Wow, amazing, man. That's so much. And I jokingly say these things. I was like, man, he needs to get an honorary, BET award or Soul Train award. But he needs, your dad and you is such a part of this fabric of music, and so many different styles. It's one of those cases where sometimes there's so much and it's just sort of spread around that I'm glad now we have the internet and things where we can sit down and be like, okay, let's start going through this now. So that's why I say, give us some of the starting points, because you're right. Your dad had so many different styles, but all of those styles, I think, sort of, you can hear them. And you talked about earlier, sort of, you can hear that sort of the gospel, the church roots, and how that sort of touches so many different styles of music, and why these artists gravitate toward it, and why, I remember as a younger person listening to it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's Clare Fischer, excuse me. I could hear it in other songs. When I heard those 20, I was like, oh yeah, I already know that's where they got it from. They was listening to some Prince. They had, he's the guy. You can tell the style, and it just is beautiful. And even, D'Angelo, which in my opinion is a direct disciple of Prince, he's studied it. And I would imagine that was why he's like, yeah, if I want some stuff like this, I got to go to the masters. If Prince worked with them, then they the ones I got to go to. I grew up listening to this sound. It's got to be there. Last question I want to ask you, because again, I kept saying cinematic. And it speaks to me on that level. Have you guys had have you done any, aside from the Prince stuff, any other movie scoring or things of that nature?
I mean, usually the way it works in the case of my father and myself is a song that either he or I or both of us added orchestra to for somebody's album will get picked up and used as music for a movie. And so I've got a list that I'm sort of accumulating now of different songs that I've worked on, actually there's a lot of songs that I worked on for Raphael Sadiq have found their way into movies quite recently.
Yes.
And so that's the way that we've done it. But as far as, I would love to write for a movie. I mean, I'm just like you, I'm a huge fan of John Williams. I feel that he is amazing. He's the real deal. He is a guy that has just absorbed everything that is important about the history of music. And I mean, that's to me is very important. Is I want to carry on history here. I want to pay homage to all the great composers that came before me as I am creating new works of art. And so it's very important for me to carry on that history, and I think John Williams does an excellent job of that. And I would love to do that. The only thing that happens, with the movie business today is really it's in the hands of very few composers, and so it's not something that I have tried to do in my lifetime that I have, set as a goal. If it would happen, that would be great. And I love the fact that music that I've worked on for albums has appeared in many movies to this date. But I mean, somebody's going to have to take a chance in their minds. You know what I'm saying?
I get you.
It's for them to hire somebody new, they have to take a chance when, there are these other, like I said, there's a handful of guys out there that are doing most of the major scoring work, and they do an excellent job at it. And so I know that, I would definitely be a different voice. I mean, I have my own sound just like each one of them does, but that's, I'll leave that up to, the producers of major motion pictures. Maybe one of them will hear the work I've done for D'Angelo or something like that, and they'll be inspired by it, and they'll ask me to do something one day. But that will be one of those things. Like if it happens, that's wonderful. But if not, I'm also really enjoying what I'm doing right now.
For sure. There's one director that I could see your work would be great in his movies, and I think he would have the appreciation of what you bring to the table, and that would be Spike Lee.
Oh yeah. Well, we worked for Spike Lee, my dad and I, in the early '90s.
Do the Right Thing?
No, what was the Mo Better Blues? I think there was one thing on there, but it was it was just one of those things. Like every once in a while, when he needed an orchestra added to just a single song, not necessarily something that would go for the whole movie. But that would be. I saw Spike Lee at Prince's Memorial here in L.A. earlier this year, and he had some great things to say and he's just a phenomenally gifted director, and just like a visionary. So that would be my great honor to work for him again.
Okay.
Yeah, that was something that we got to do a long time ago, and it was that was also a great honor, and to go see the movie screenings before it gets released to the public. That was a lot of fun.
I think. There's the song with Al Jarreau and your father. Wasn't that in a Spike Lee thing?
Could be, yeah. And I wrote. That was another Christmas album that I worked on. I wrote an orchestral arrangement for Al Jarreau's album called Christmas, which he released, I think, in 2008. Okay. And that was also just so. Just such a great experience to put that together, and it was a wonderful producer, Larry Williams, that put that whole album together. It was a phenomenal project. But I mean, all these great things that you're mentioning, that would be fantastic to do things like that at some point in the future. But right now, I'm very happy with all the developments that we have going on right now, and that I'm, still here all these years later doing it and still enjoying it immensely.
All right. Well, once again, Brent, we so much thank you for coming on and sharing with us today, man. You shed a lot of light, cracked open a lot of things we didn't think about. And let me hold on one second. We got to talking, and this is bad host. Big Sexy and Sack, man. I know you've been sitting here studying with me this whole thing. I got to make sure. Is there any questions you want to ask?
Dude, what am I, Ed McMahon?
I just was like, you were so quiet, and I was like, totally slipped my mind through here. My bad.
Brent, one thing I want to ask you. You and I are a couple of months apart in age, and I know that you worked on the Destiny, or you were around when Destiny was happening with your dad and the Jacksons. As a young person going back to 78, what was that like for you to know that, okay, this is my dad, and he's hanging with Michael Jackson and the Jacksons? How did that make you feel just watching these types of things as you grew up?
Well, it was, first of all, you get the impression as a teenager, because I was a teenager when that was happening, and I hadn't started working with him at that point. So, this is, but I had seen this, I had seen stuff like this. This was, I don't mean to sound jaded or anything when I say this, because it truly is, a great thing to think about every time you think, my dad worked with the Jackson 5, when I was a teenager. But at that point, he had already worked with Rufus, and Rufus was really climbing up the charts. And they were also, I remember one time they gave us tickets. I sat in the front row with my dad to see Rufus and Stevie Wonder perform live, and got to meet all the band afterwards and meet Stevie. And so that was kind of, things like that were happening for me all the time while I was growing up. I was getting to meet a lot of people in the studios, and so I didn't get to meet Michael Jackson that time, but actually we did both, my father and I, go out to Neverland in 2003 to meet with Michael Jackson about doing a project, which unfortunately never got off the ground. It was one of those things that we talked about it, and then things happened in his life, and he had to stop doing music for a while, and so that project never got done, and it's really too bad that never happened, because it would have been another great experience, doing a full album with Michael Jackson. But I did get to do that one song, "This Is It," albeit posthumously. But yeah, that would have been a great thing. But so that's how I felt as a kid. Was it was really cool at the time, but also it was something that I was okay with and I was used to, and so I learned how to be professional around artists, because when you're around a celebrity, you don't want to do anything silly. I mean, you just want to treat them with great respect and reverence, and treat them also, but treat them also like a normal person, because these are the people that they want to surround themselves with. And I think that's one of the reasons why I have been asked by various people over the years to work on projects with them, is that I was not sitting and asking a lot of questions like a fan, like a fan might do sometimes when we're in the middle of a project and we're trying to get work done. Later on it can come up in casual conversation, but basically, I mean, people want to be treated like normal human beings, even celebrities. They a lot of times when you're working on a project, they just want to be one of the guys, albeit they may be in charge of the project, but they want to be treated as one of the guys and taking care of business and getting everything done. And I think that's what I learned by growing up in this environment and being exposed to a lot of celebrities and meeting them all throughout my childhood and into my teen years, until I finally started working for some of them at around the time that I got into college.
Wow. All right, man. A Michael Jackson album with Clare Fischer. Ooh.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was gonna be both of us. We're gonna write full orchestra songs, and featuring featuring both of us writing for the orchestra and Michael Jackson and all these different songs. And that was just, unfortunately, every once in a while, something like that happens where it just doesn't come together. And there have been a couple other things like that have happened over the years. I'm just glad that most of them did go through, and look forward to the ones in the future.
All right. All righty. Well, one thing I'm definitely going to do after this is, what was the saying on your dad's shirt when you walk in there? Was it tune up or die? Or what?
Tune it or die.
Tune it or die. I'm getting me a tune it or die T-shirt.
That's the thing. It was like, you better do the best job that you possibly can for me. And that I remember even when my dad was, he was, frail physically towards the end of his life, as all people are when they get old. But he still was so sharp musically. And I remember being in there on the Michael Jackson recording, and John McClane was there, and all the different, a lot of different people that were adding to the tracks of what was originally just Michael Jackson singing with a pianist. And so we were all there, and my dad was in the control room listening. We were at Capitol Studio A, and I was conducting the orchestra, and we were just getting started, and I was listening and checking out all the orchestral parts, making sure nobody had any questions about what I had written, and there weren't any mistakes on any of the written out parts that we needed to, correct anything. And so listening to that, and I was noticing that the group was not quite playing in tune yet, but I figured let's, all in due course, let's get the note questions out of the way first, and then we'll deal with the intonation. But so I was going through one take, and then I stopped to talk about something, and Al Schmidt, the engineer, he called in from the control room, and he said, "Brent, your dad has something he'd like to say to the orchestra." And so I said, "Okay, everybody listen up." And so my dad just leaned into the control room mic, and he just very, very softly but firmly said, "Intonation." In other words, tuning. Intonation is, playing in tune. And everybody, again, they just sat up in their chairs and, came to attention. And from that moment on, the tuning was that much tighter. From that point on, it was never really an issue. And And that's what I'm saying about, the fact that I was still able to, even towards the end of his life, keep him active and participating in these projects, even though I was doing, everything myself. But to have him along, and to experience it together, in a way that had started out when I was a teenager. That was, just a wonderful experience in my lifetime that I'll always treasure.
Wow, man, respect. And again, we're learning a lot about the Prince stuff, but I would say the larger thing we're learning, and say this to my listeners, is that relationship between a father and a son, and that legacy, and upholding and carrying on that legacy. So we're going to all tune up. I won't say die, but we're going to tune up and do better. But we're going to learn from you guys' story, man. We're going to learn from how you take on what your dad did and taking it to the next level, and you doing your thing and influencing others. So we just receiving all of that, what you just said too. And this is a blessing. And again, thank you for coming on the show. One last thing, again, just so we're clear, where can people go to learn more about you and your father, and to get more music?
All right, sure. Well, there's BrentFischer.com and ClareFischer.com, of course. And then, just Google the name. And then a lot of stuff will come up there. YouTube clips that you can check out. And then, all the different, like I said, all the different retailers, Amazon, CD Baby, or any place, if you want to check out some of the albums and listen to all the different things that we've done over the years. Basically, that's it. The only thing I think you need to remember on the last name Fischer is that it's spelled Fischer. There is a C in there, which is the German way to spell the word Fischer, and that's because I'm part German. I'm actually like a mix of 12 different nationalities, but the last name comes from Germany.
All right,
and that's from like 400 years ago. When one of my ancestors left Germany, went over to Canada, and then eventually they made their way to the States. And my father was first generation born in the States, and I'm the first generation born in L.A.
All right. LA.
Yeah.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you had a great time listening. Listen, as always, we appreciate you supporting us and checking us out. And of course, you can find this on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, all those great places. You can also find us on Facebook. Just look up Podcast Juice or the Prince Podcast. And what else? Also Patreon. Shout out to all of our Patreon supporters. You can go on there and get exclusive podcasts and content. And it's patreon.com/podcast juice. I'm losing it already. Listen, it's the holiday time. Shout out to Big Sexy and Sack, also helping me, holding me down, holding me up. We really appreciate it. Shout out to the rest of the team. And as I always say, work it like a job. We'll see you next time. Peace.